We're here with Eric Gross, and I think, instead of me reading an introduction, I think that maybe you could introduce yourself, just give some milestones or whatever that you want to touch on.
Okay. Um, I am. I guess I'm by nature a fairly analytical person, and I think one of the questions that I has haunted me is, what is real and what isn't real, and um, and I even can remember debating. I think I was 9 years old with a girl that I was in school with about is nothing something, and so I've always been sort of a kind of, I don't know, for better or for worse, a kind of a philosophic disposition. And I think also, and this might be something you can relate to yourself, growing up shortly after the Holocaust,
Hmm.
um, there is a sense of how insane the world can be. And it's, when it's the Holocaust, these enormous horrific events become, kind of testing grounds for this world of positive thinking, that God loves us, and the universe is a caring environment. And, whether you're a Jew or you're a Tutsi in Uganda or someone growing up in Cambodia in the 1980s with Pol Pot, you learn to question those assumptions. So anyway,
Hmm.
I don't want to quite belabor that point, but it becomes important later in the discussion. So when I was about 15, I think I read the Tao Te Ching, and I loved it very much, and I read a bunch of translations, and it really resonated as true to me. And then I kind of put it aside, and I went to grad school. I studied a very technical field, and then years later, I was a statistician for the New York City Department of Health, and I met this guy who gave me this book by Krishnamurti. I think it was The Awakening of Intelligence,
Hmm.
and I was a big time. No, actually that's an exaggeration. I was a casual Marxist, and I had the fatal flaw of having a sense of humor about Marxism, which means you could never be taken seriously among by other Marxists. So, but I read this book by Krishnamurti, and it blew me away. And I sort of put the Marxism aside, at least temporarily, and it really began this long um, involvement in what became a Zen Buddhist practice. And I spent years meditating, and the despair of my wife, and um, I was even, I got sort of the official badge of awakening from a prominent Zen teacher, and as I said earlier, Jerry, it didn't mean anything to me. My life still had lots of confusion, conflict, periods of happiness and unhappiness. And then, just to end this encapsulated biography, years later, I got this position as a running a prison alternative program near just outside of Philadelphia, and I held the madness of the criminal justice system, which was is itself a fascinating story. But and because of the craziness of it, I wanted to see if there was an alternative form of understanding justice, and I learned about the Navajo peacemaking program out in New Mexico and Arizona, and I wrote a series of grants, and eventually the U.S. Department of Justice funded me to go out there, and I spent nearly 7 years working with traditional Navajo healers, and I saw this incredibly magnificent dovetailing of Buddhist and Navajo cosmology, sort of like convergent evolution. These Navajo healers knew between nothing and very little of Buddhism, and yet um, traditional Navajo culture has developed a worldview that is remarkably similar to what you'd find in many schools of Buddhist philosophy and cosmology, and the dovetailing of those two themes really gave birth to the two books I've written, Liberation from the Lie and Trust in Liberation. And so I'm it's just amazing how life works out. But I'm just incredibly grateful for that.
I don't know where to begin really, but I'm kind of struck a little with that you are so involved in Native American, particularly Navajo system of, and you've mentioned Navajo justice, Navajo peacemaking, Navajo counseling. I guess are they all basically the same thing?
They are, because they're all rooted in the same cosmological philosophy, and I think that's simply my nature as a human being. Um, and I think what happened was, as a kid, and I mean as a little kid, I was simply bowled over by the Holocaust, and I just am by nature someone who is, I feel a lot of pain when there's racism and intolerance, and so when I read about the Indian Wars in the growth of the United States, and how that created this enormous uh, field of violence between the Native Americans and the Europeans who came to this hemisphere in 1492. I think my heart went out to them, and I always felt this kind of melancholy connection with them. And I really was not especially interested in Navajos. It's just that the Navajos are, just for your listeners, they're an especially large tribe. And because they are large and they have a lot of land, and because the land is so bad and is so undesirable to whites, that they've been able to maintain a lot of the core elements of their traditional culture. Um, Most tribes were not nearly so lucky. They lost their language. They lost most of their culture. Many are extinct. But the Navajos and a handful of other tribes have really been very successful in maintaining their language and their traditional understandings of the cosmos. And just to add one more, I can easily become rather academic, and I'll try not to. Because they live in a part of the world that is so difficult to survive in, the southwestern desert, they are truly very oriented to what they need to do to survive. Um, so when people, particularly urbane Westerners, read about Native Americans, it often becomes translated into a kind of New Age, fluffy philosophy. But in fact, it's a very tough, challenging environment in order to survive and to live, as they would say, to walk in beauty in a very difficult world. It is it was a tremendous experience to understand this. And I think one of the things I was about to say earlier, Jerry, was when people get first involved in Buddhism, the first one of the first stories they hear is the life of Siddhartha, and that he was born and raised in an environment of extraordinary opulence and wealth, and he he had he's always surrounded by servants and fine foods, and he eventually married a spectacularly beautiful woman and had children, and or a child. And the one thing his parents insisted upon is that he would never leave the palace grounds, and to see the real world of suffering, of death, of disease, uh, um, and, as it turns out, ascetic monks, which were the four things he did see when he finally was able to break out of the palace grounds. And as we read this story, we know that he actually never returned, and he followed the path of the ascetic monk, which was the fourth thing he saw. After he saw poverty, disease, and death, he then saw the ascetic monk, and that was sort of that fourth element, is that element of that actually a life of suffering is not necessarily inevitable, that there is a pathway to living a not to say a life without challenges, but a life where you're not a prisoner of fear, insecurity, and then needing to establish a whole pantheon of rose-colored beliefs in order um, to resist those truths, that you can live with those truths and live a life of balance, harmony, and truth to what is actual in one's lived experience. So when you hear that story, that dovetails with a remarkable precision to one of the core Navajo stories. There, when the world was first formed, it was dominated by these terrible monsters, and the main deity of the Navajos, Changing Woman, wanted the world to have human beings, but it was way too dangerous. So she sent her two twin boys to the earth to make it safe for humans. And the boys' names are important. His name is Monster Slayer, and he's a big, tough, dynamic guy. And the other one is called Born for Water, and he is pensive, meditative, thoughtful. And so Born for Water planned this great journey from Monster Slayer to take to cover the world and to kill it of monsters. And that's exactly what happens. Monster Slayer goes out to the world and kills all the monsters. He eventually returns to Born for Water, and Born for Water said, "Have you killed all the monsters?" Now, and think about the Buddha story a little bit. And Monster Slayer says, "I have made the world safe for human beings, but," this is the important but, "I was not able, even I was not able to conquer the monsters of frustration, depression, hopelessness, and the fourth one, hunger." And these are precise parallels to the story of Siddhartha. Hunger is that feeling we get inside ourselves to say, is this all there is? Is there a way of lifting myself up over these monsters that even a god couldn't kill? So when you see those two amazing parallel stories, and I just noticed that. This is just something I knew those stories well, but I never put them together until a couple of days ago. So I was sort of blown away by that. But they're powerful teaching stories.
And people are drawn to Buddhism. People are drawn to Native American traditions and culture. But before that, I just want to talk about making all this really personal and going back to the experiences with the Holocaust or Holocaust survivors. Just want to go back to that. When I was a kid, my mother or father encountered someone they knew who was in a concentration camp. They would ask that person to show me, or my brothers, their tattooed number on them, so that we would have a firsthand experience about what happened. Did you experience that?
I did, yes, and I also had members of they're distant relatives, but members, not all that distant, who died in the Holocaust, and that cloud was sort of over my childhood family, and I think this is something that a lot of Jewish kids have in common. They see pictures and films of the actually photographed of the camps, and it's so unbelievably horrific. It is so horrific that it challenges the young child's mind to integrate in, could this, how did this happen? How do people do this? What are the mechanisms that allow people to do an event of such monstrous? The images are themselves are so horrific that they raise all these very profound questions about what is it to be a human being in this world. And to me, when I read anything in philosophy, or especially the kind of things that you and I have been drawn to, I give it the Holocaust test. Does this in fact resonate as true in direct lived human experience? And that has really been the challenge of my own life as someone who's tried to seek a way of understanding and integrating all this in lived experience, to live a life that when one dies, one does not die with regrets that I didn't do the right thing, or or I failed my own conscience to pursue these questions, or that these images are too horrific and I'd rather seclude myself in a beautiful, more hedonistic environment where I don't have to consider them. So, but that is in fact the reality and truth of not ancient history, but of modern history, and it goes on today in many parts of the world. When people are consumed, this is how I see it, when people are consumed by powerlessness, when they act from lack, and when the lack is very deep and very dark, they will be willing to do almost anything to fill that unfillable abyss with whatever belief system makes them feel strong, and therefore enables these when people get together and create groups where they feel similarly, and often where there's a charismatic leader, they sort of self-organize and they become potent, dangerous forces in people's everyday life. And that also operates on the personal level. And that's sort of where most of the Buddhist and in my own writing has operated, not so much on the group level, but what operates on the individual level operates as well on the group level.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it has to start somewhere. So, um, we become familiar with this suffering, in our own personal lives, through our experience with people who have experienced the Holocaust, and or through the story of Buddha Siddhartha experiencing suffering and overcoming it. And it seems to me that that's also true for Native Americans, perhaps the Navajos more than other groups, but maybe not. That there's something appealing, like you said, they live out in the desert and survive. There's something appealing about meeting suffering and surviving it and overcoming it, whether it's a Holocaust survivor or whether it's our own experience of these Holocaust survivors. There's something about facing suffering, and overcoming it. And I wonder if that's part of the appeal. I mean, what is it that appeals to people about like Native American culture specifically? Is that part of it, that basically surviving successfully, and something grounding about that?
But it's much more than surviving. They truly did, without looking at it through a lens that distorts their experience. Their philosophies are especially beautiful in that, for example, let's just look at the example of being a baby. The Navajo baby is perceived to be perfect. There are no questions asked about the imperfection of the baby. They are not seen as a possession of the parents. They are perceived to be a direct, immediate exhaling of the creator, just like anything else in the universe, whether it's a mountain, a forest, a fish, a bird. So it is with the human baby. And what is interesting is we have almost the exact opposite notion. Yeah, sure, birds and fish, yeah, they're fine, but humans need to be civilized. They need to live as structured lives. They need to be scolded when they do something wrong. They need to learn fear. That's one of the things that the youngest babies, we often put them in dark rooms. We close the door. We let them cry. We don't have all that much physical. Many people don't give them the amount of physical contact that you'll see in Native American world, where that baby is literally attached to their mother or father or aunt and uncle all the time till they're about 3 years old. And when you teach a child, a very young child, I'm talking about a child 6 months and younger, fear, whether it's by saying it's bedtime, I'm turning off the light, good night, and they cry their heads off, they don't overcome fear. They simply repress it. So that fear becomes what the wonderful Stephen Walensky calls the core thought, the core organizing principles. How do I manage fear? And that's how nearly all of us, and I don't exclude myself, manage our lives, is how do I manage this innate, this underlying but unspoken fear, because it's been so repressed in nearly all of us that we don't even know it's there. So therefore, we are drawn to whatever makes us feel good, or makes us feel secure, or makes us feel in control. And hence we get civilization. This world of we put up all these walls because vulnerability is weakness. And the beautiful part of being drawn to something like Buddhism or non-duality or and there are Western schools of philosophy that mirror those, is it's saying the only people who are drawn to this are people who get a sense that there is this fear underneath the surface. They're probably somewhat prone to depression now and then, because depression, I really believe that the layers of the persona have they're like Swiss cheese. They have holes in them, and if you don't try to cover the holes up with basically belief and fluff, and are really willing to let that take a cold hard look at those fears and your own maturation as a human being, if you're willing to do that, you really take the Buddhist path. You're not drawn to false positivism. Instead, you're drawn to the cold, sober look at how the sense of lack and fear has created this life. So and that when we, like, for example, when we hear about Native Americans and the beauty of their childhoods and their sense of the baby being perfect, there's a part of us, every human being on this planet, that connects with that perfection, because down deep, that is who we are. But it's been covered over by these layers that have been created by punishment, scolding. As I am not okay, because I heard that message loud and clear by my parents 10,000 times. So we strive to be either what we think will get us love from our parents, or if we're angry enough at our parents, what can I do to make them as pissed off as I can? We become the rebellious child. So to me, things like Taoism, Buddhism, non-duality, Stoicism in Roman and Greek philosophy is a return, or and Taoism uses that word a lot. It's a return to this formative moment in our own life, because these things don't go away. They're a living echo in our day-to-day existence. We see them in our anger. We see them in our impatience. We see them in our judgmentalness. We see them in the people around us. And the more we see this, and the beauty about non-duality in Buddhism is this emphasis on just simple seeing. The more we see it, the more we learn about our own selves, because we're much more alike than we are different. Or so I would certainly assert that as the truth. So I think drawn in, there is that connection to the cosmos that is effortlessly beautiful. We don't have to think about it. It's not something we have to convince ourselves is true, because down deep, for some of us it's not that deep, but for many of us it's very deep. We realize that we too are connected to the cosmos, and so when we see the birds, trees, mountains, and even some of the great, beautiful accomplishments of human beings in the arts and sciences, we see that is in fact the perfection of our own being, under all these other layers of belief and fear.
Yeah, and its expression then seems to be this seeing as not only the baby as perfect, but as every being, or even every atom, as perfect.
It is all, and so we see this whole drive to be better and self-improvement as a kind of madness, because that's exactly what the Buddha advised us not to do. Because then we're filled with desire, because as I am, I suck. So therefore, I have to become a better person. So when I lose my temper or I get impatient, the super ego marches in like a little soldier and go, see, you are the shit that down deep you really believe you are. So then it's just a circular loop of the struggle against unhappiness. It's like going to the beach and trying to hold the waves back. And the more the harder you work at it, the more you obviously totally fail at your hopeless mission. The thing is to take the waves in rather than try to hold them back. But that's a scary proposition for nearly everybody, because we're too insecure, we feel too powerless to control our lives, and it's so much easier to hear things that console us and make us feel better. And actually, for some people, this is just not me, that might also work for them to eventually get them to turn around and go, let's see, is this really, in fact, fear in like sheep's clothing in my life? Is this little beautiful belief really just the sort of candy-like coating that inside is this kernel of fear that we're trying to still spend the whole 70, 80 years of our lives trying to cover up?
I really like one of the aspects of your work that I really like, and you have it on your website. I'll mention your website, liberationfromthelie.com. Of course, that's your first book, Liberation from the Lie. Great book.
Thank you.
And one of the things I really like is how you talk about this process of Navajo healing, and it's based on this seeing of perfection as things are. It's based on this seeing, basically. If you want to just use the word seeing rather than seeing of perfection. Can you give an example of that? And there's something amazing on your website, and could be disturbing, but it's very powerful. But whatever example you want to give, or however you want to talk about it, if you wish to, I wonder if you would talk about that.
I'm allowed to talk about by the Navajo Nation. I've been asked not to write about certain things, and the things that I've been asked not to write about are things that they've chosen. Sometimes they're mysterious to me why they ask me not to write about them. I don't understand their reasoning, but nonetheless, I honor it. So for example, certain Navajo words I'm not supposed to translate. I don't have a clue why they don't want them translated, but they don't. One of the things one of the beautiful things I learned from Navajo was that the source of all conflict, the source of all violence, the source of all depression is invalidation. That when the core being is invalidated, what Ramana would say, our beingness, when that is invalidated, then the false persona comes in. And it comes in very, very, very early in life, way before we're even verbal. So one of the things the Navajos try to do is to reverse invalidation.
Mm-hmm.
So the question becomes, how do we reverse invalidation? Is there a way? And the Navajos say, yes, there is a way. And the way is this. And I'll give a very, very, very short example taken directly from my observation of the Navajo practice, of this secular healing practice. A young man got arrested for selling crack on the res. And he was taken to conventional court, and the court gave him the option of going to a traditional healer or going to jail. And, of course, he chose the traditional healer. So I was invited to watch the healing process. So I just not what your listeners probably imagine. I entered a kind of dilapidated office because Navajos are quite poor and they don't have fancy offices. And there's an old peacemaker sitting around a table, and this young man was sitting on by the wall, about 6 or 7 feet away, and the healer completely ignored him. And I'm just watching this young man sitting there, and he's a tough guy. He has gang symbols tattooed on his body, and with complete indifference, the healer looked up and said, "So what are you here for?" And the young man said, "I got arrested for selling crack." And the healer, I could see a smile forming on his face, and that struck me as first sort of interesting element here. And he said, so you sell crack to your own people? He looked straight at the young man, and the young man acted a little ashamed. And he said, yes, that's what I was arrested for. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, do you sell crack to your own people? Is that true? And the young man said, yeah, I do. And the healer looked at him. He looked at him with a sense of complete love. And he said, that's a good thing to do, isn't it? To sell crack to your own people. And he meant every word of it. You could tell his sincerity was complete. He said, it's a good thing for you to sell crack to your own people. And the young man got shocked. I could see he was sort of himself indifferent to the process. He raised his head and he said, did you just say that it's a good thing for me to sell crack to my own people? And the healer said, yes, that's what I said. I said, it's a good thing for you to sell crack to your own people. And then he invited the young man to sit next to him. And he looked at him right in the eyes, he put his hands on the young man's shoulder, and he said his name, and he said, I'm saying it's good for you to sell crack to your own people. And what the healer was doing was he was validating his experience no matter what form it took. And it's sort of what Eckhart Tolle often says, the content is secondary because that's always changing. And what he was saying is it's a good thing no matter what happens because it's the way the creation intends it to be. It's not for us to figure it out or to second guess it, to judge it, to evaluate it. It's a good thing. But he stunned the young man. And the young man still wasn't understanding it. And he said, I still can't believe you're saying it's a good thing. And the healer sort of said, it's good because it brought you and I together. On this day, in this hour, it brought us together. And then he looked at the young person and he said, when you were 10, did you dream that one day you would be selling crack to your own people? And the young person said, no, I didn't dream this. And then the healer said, is this what you wanted? Is this what you wanted in your life? And the young person got very pensive and he said, no, I didn't want this. So the healer then said, but I can tell by looking at you that you are a very powerful person. Again, this is validation.
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful person. So you must have chosen to do this, even though you're telling me now you didn't want to do this. Because you did choose this, didn't you? You did choose to sell crack to your own people, didn't you? And the young person said, he looked around and he was like, I could tell he was confused. And he said, did I choose this? Did I choose this? He was asking himself. And the healer said, you chose it, did you not? You chose to sell crack to your own people. And the young person said, I guess I did, but I never put it to myself that way. I guess I did. So he said, well, then let me ask you again. Is this what you want to do? Is this your dream of living your life? And the young person said, I don't have a life. My life is fucked up. I have no life. I'm a fucking mess. Can't you see this? He started getting more dramatic and more sad and melancholy. And then the healer put his arm around the young man. He said, what is it you did dream? Tell me your dreams when you were about 10. And the young man said, he broke into tears. And this is a very, very stoical culture, Navajo. It's very warrior society. And the young man broke into tears and he said, I dreamed that my father would love me. And there was a long silence. And he said, you dreamed your father would love you. And he said, does your father love you? And the young person just nodded no. He beats us. He beats my sister. I had to get away from him. And so the healer said, so where's your dream now? Where's that 10-year-old dream now? And he said, then the healer said, is the dream dead? And the young person said, the dream is dead. The dream is dead. My life's fucked up. I'm fucked up. This world is fucked up. And and he just was a beaten person. And what the healer was doing was getting the young person in contact with his more primal self, his life of as a child looking for love, which he never got, and then making choices which he said, obviously didn't reflect what his real dream was as a human being in this life. So, the process does go on from there. He does. I guess I should finish this, Jerry. So in the midst of all this sadness and turmoil, and it's hard for me to evoke this to your listeners, but this young man was weeping there because all his memories were flooding back to him about his childhood and his broken dream. And in the midst of all of that, the healer said, well, it was nice meeting you. I wish you a good life. Goodbye. And the man looked up and went, what? What did you just say? And the healer said, I wish you a good life. our time together is finished. And the young man's jaw dropped, and he said, I just spilled my guts to you, and you're telling me to get lost. You're telling me to go fuck myself. He used a lot of profanity. And the healer said, no, I'm just telling you to live your life. But our time is done. And the young man got enraged. He said, aren't you a healer? Aren't you here to help me? Aren't you here to guide me? And the healer went, am I? Am I here to heal you? Am I? And he kept on saying, am I here to heal you? And the young person said, yes. He said, he was like, he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He said, can't you see that my life is a mess? Can't you see that I need healing? Can't you see I need something? He's just desperate. And the healer went, he looked at him again very, very intently and put his arm around him. He said, if I could heal you, I would, but I can't. So that's the truth. And the young man said, well, then this is fucked up. You can go fuck yourself. And he was just furious. He said, you're a wasteless, useless piece of... And he was just enraged. So then the healer looked at him again. He said, and I forget the young man's name, but he repeated his name. And he said, there is a healer in this room, but it isn't me. I remember the young man, by the way, looked at me. Is it him? And the, put his arm. He said, don't look at the white man. He said, and he basically said, the only healer is you. And the young man again got enraged. He said, I'm not though. I'm a mess. I'm this and that and the other thing. And then what the healer this went on for a long time, this anger. And what the healer wanted, what the healer wanted was to bring out the person's innate sense of, where am I now? What is my truth now? Where is my vigor, my vitality? So then the healer took out a sheet of paper, and it was a pre-printed sheet, and it was of 2 columns, Navajo way and white man's way. And there's no judgmentalness about the 2 columns. He said, take this paper home and circle those things that appear. And they were things like, in the Western way, they might have been therapy, graduating high school, drug and alcohol rehabilitation, college prep. And on the Navajo way, it might have been sweat lodge, drumming, singing, learning how to make a bow and arrow, hunting. It was a very, very long list. And he said, take this paper home and circle those things that move you. He said, not in your head, but in your heart. And he pointed to his heart. He said, read these words with your heart and then bring it back to me tomorrow. And this will be your path, your way, your healing, your voice, your life, your choices, your vision. He made that long list he said, this is your way. So he was really bringing the young person back to his dream. It might not be gaining his father's love, but it was feeling the young man's sense of power and beingness. By power, I mean authentic power in this world, based upon what I feel is right and good and balanced and centered in me. And when I saw this, and then about a year or so later, I then studied dozens and dozens of such cases and saw the extraordinary impact they had in these young people's lives. It just blew my mind. And we went to sort of a party where a lot of the people who went through the program saw their healers again and the traditional counselors. And these big Navajo guys literally jump in these older men's arms and go, "This person saved me." And there's tears and incredible passion. Now compare that with our criminal justice system, where we just say, you're a piece of crap. We're going to lock you up for 6 months to 2 years, and then you become a better criminal in jail, and there's no accountability, and there's no caring. There's all there is punishment. And the Navajos do not even have a word for punishment. There is no word in their language for punishment. And there's no punishment in their justice system ever under any circumstances. So this gave me a riveting view of alternative way of finding connection and balance and harmony in one's life If any of your listeners are in New York City, I've been invited to do this process right here in New York City at Covenant House, which I think is the largest young adult housing nonprofit in the United States and one of the largest in the world. And hopefully we're starting this in the beginning of February or late January 2013.
I love that description. I think it evokes a lot of emotion to people listening. And for some reason, when earlier when we were talking about people, Holocaust survivors showing their, the number that they were tattooed with in the concentration camps, and as kids seeing that, somehow it seemed like this entire process is like a revealing of another tattoo, that a person has on them. I felt that same emotion.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. We all have this tattoo because no matter how well intended our parents were, they themselves were children of well intended parents who simply replicate this fear inducing form of you're not right as you are parenting to a varying extent, because there are many loving and caring families that really, really love their kids on the terms of their own children. And those kids tend to grow up very resilient, and they tend to be compassionate. But when parents feel they need to, this sort of tough love to babies, which is such a bizarre notion, that's where you get this, as you put it, Jerry, this tattoo of there's something, as I am, there's something profoundly wrong with me. And, therefore I'm drawn to, positivist pathways that I can self-improve. And that is not the way of the Buddha. The Buddha is in of non-duality, is of seeing. And seeing it, if it took 10,000 times to get that way, you might have to see it 10,000 times. And self-improvement, but simply to connect yourself with that primal sense of beingness. And one of the really beautiful ways you can express this, that if someone says something to you that really pisses you off and annoys you and gets under your skin, first of all, they are probably connecting with an underlying self-image, which you have refused to acknowledge in your own life. That's one. And two, this is more of an Advaita way of spin on it, that no matter how painful the statement, no matter how angry you were in your response, the you that you really are is unaffected by it. Whatever happens next, and it doesn't really matter. The beingness of Jerry or Eric or whoever is in fact unaffected, no matter how big the psychological self made of this probably fairly trivial incident.
And going to that or seeing that beingness kind of happens just in hearing or talking about that Holocaust story, of seeing the tattoos and of hearing your description of the healing. Something happens, at least in my listening to you, that this fierce self, you can feel it melting just in emotion.
You stop trying to block the waves, because when you see that you do survive that mean comment or those long lines at the supermarket, or you lost your job, or even you lost your husband or wife, or that you in fact survive quite intact no matter what happens, and you keep on seeing that and you go, whoa, this whole struggle, this enormous amount of effort I put into self-improvement, this meditating or whatever, if you're doing it for the sake of self-improvement, and I got to always have a smile on my face, and I always have to feel positive and blah, 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 it takes so much work. It's still that holding back of the waves. Let the waves fall and see where you see that being survives everything. No matter what happens. If the Holocaust happens, being survives. And you see it everywhere in the world. No matter how violent modern civilization is on the natural world, nature will survive. Beingness survives everything. And you see that, and the strength you always sought from being a better person, you realize you already possess. And to me, that's what all my writings have been about, that when you think that I'm this flawed thing, yeah, then you will pursue a million pathways. You'll read 100,000 books, and you'll never be good enough. You never be good enough. You'll always be looking up at the pedestal and seeing people like Muji or or the Buddha or whoever else you want to put as, well, this person has what I lack. And no, that's not true. The whole premise is wrong. You have the same beingness of the Buddha, and that's why that famous koan, I think it's called Joshua's moo. His dog had Buddha nature, and Joshua says moo, and you realize that moo is the expression of the beingness, which has no discernible physical qualities that we all are. And that's just the beauty of non-duality Buddhism and all this Navajo stuff, all coming as one united, continuous, non-separated recognition of what is true, no matter how tough and challenging life may become, or no matter what story you tell yourself about what kind of person you really are.
So let's, I mean, just coming from the fear self or small self, I guess, is it pretty much the same as what Eckhart Tolle calls the pain body, I guess?
I think it is. I think he expresses it very well. I've seen that. I think there's some, it's just human nature to feel a little envious. I mean, Eckhart Tolle has been incredibly successful, and probably some of it has gone to his head. He charges a lot for personal. He doesn't. I don't think he does a lot of personal events, but I really think Eckhart Tolle expresses it very, very well. And I really enjoy hearing him and reading him. And he has a great sense of humor too, and a nice sense of irony, and a very appealing quality to his beingness. And I think, in a way, I don't want to reduce philosophy to being a furniture salesman, but everyone, whether you're Jerry Katz or whether you're Eckhart Tolle or Muji, in a way, you're selling yourself to an audience. And I think Eckhart Tolle does a good job of that. But on the other hand, I think what he says to me rings very true. The beautiful part of having all these people, and another person I want to mention is Joan Tollefson. I think she does a great job of expressing this, is everybody's voice is unique, and especially your own. And see that, if we project it outwards to the Eckhart Tolles of the world, we forget, we sometimes lose sight of our own voice, because our own experience is, Eckhart Tolle is a small part of that. And until you can really fully embrace your own experience, you'll always be looking externally for validation, checking yourself. Am I doing this right? Et cetera. That's why my own site, my own book, I never, ever, ever look at these stuff as teachings. They're only just reminders for other people to look into themselves, because the only person that matters is you. I mean, not me. I mean, I already am doing what I enjoy doing.
Okay, so in that regard, and doing what people are doing, whether it's, you mentioned Muji, the teachers, Eckhart Tolle, anyone, how much, I mean, in order to do what we do, which is, it's just art, really, to me. It's all just, everyone's just an artist. And how much of the false self has to stay intact in order to serve as fuel for some of this creative stuff that people do?
That's a really good question, and I don't think I can fully answer it, but in a way, I think it's never a consequence of effort. It's only a consequence of seeing. I think eventually the false self almost entirely falls away. And so, for example, if you find yourself being the person you don't want to be, and anyone who's part of a family who's had kids and dealt with family issues, they do know that they lose it from time to time. Our emotional resources are not limitless, that we sometimes get short with our kids or our own parents, and we go, there I go again, loser me, blah, blah, blah. You actually stop caring about it. It's just another happening. And if you need to apologize, or you need to engage with that person saying, listen, I'm sorry, I was just tired, I was hungry, I felt kind of stressed, and hey, who doesn't now and then, but I'm sorry. You do whatever you do to mend the relations, if those relations are important to you. And even I believe, even if they're not important to you, you'll feel a whole lot better, and you'll be more connected to your primal being if you realize and this is the most, I think this is the only truth in the universe, that we are all connected. And so that when relationships are rent between you and another, whether it's a waiter at a restaurant or whether it's your father or mother, your kid, um, there is a call for bringing attention, bringing energy into that situation, and say, I wouldn't use these words, but I would come from this place that we are connected. And so, in that spirit, just in your own way, however Jerry Katz or Eric Rose expresses it, what can we do to feel good about you and me? And to me, that's that's again another Navajo principle. It's called Ke'e, and it means our limitless connections with all beings and all things in the universe. And healing that is part of the challenge of everyday life. And by the way, I'm just as flawed as the next guy. I make absolutely no pretensions. I can be negatively judgmental. I swear to God. I mean, I am full of flaws, despite all the years of meditation and all this stuff. And something I'm thankful for, because if I believed otherwise, I'd be living in a bubble of my own making, and that's the last thing in the world I'd ever want.
And how much of it is, my original question, how much of it is a source of creativity?
I think enormously. I mean, if you look at the art of and now he may have been clinically mad, but the art of Van Gogh, the writings of Franz Kafka, even the rather sorrowful late self-portraits of Rembrandt, and even the beautiful music of John Lennon, and a lot of that comes from suffering. And you realize that this notion I need to be happy all the time is an insufferable, banal, bizarre response to fear of fear, literally. And it's like, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's, beautiful line, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. The way of living your life as kind of a spiritual warrior is the willingness not to take a false path like that, to have the smile glued on your face and, lovey-dovey falseness. There's plenty of time in life to love and to be smiling and laughing and all that stuff. And guess what? Life is highly textured, and it will get rough and difficult. And it's like that, again, that Holocaust tattoo. Things can get really, really difficult. Again, going to a little bit of Jewish history, as you know, Jerry, when the Germans came into Poland and they began hoarding Jews into prison-like ghettos, the Jews would say, well, it won't get any worse than this. And they had no idea what was waiting for them on the horizon. But, it is true that life can get extraordinarily difficult, and history and the human story of life on this planet has shown that to be true. And now, in 2012, we're seeing nature equally assaulted by the demands of voracious human civilization and great suffering on that end as well. And humans will not escape that suffering, and they're not escaping even now. Many are embroiled, particularly living in impoverished areas of the third world, with global climate change, impoverished soils. Their crops are not growing properly. Great areas of drought. So until we realize we really are connected, including all of nature, we'll never be able to get the kind of uniformity of vision needed to really change things. So, we're still on this very destructive trajectory, and we'll be on that trajectory until the dialectic shifts. If it ever does, it eventually will shift, whether we like it or not. But currently, that's the trajectory we're on.
And I know politics is an interest of yours. I want to focus on where it all starts and ends, like right here. So if we can't get rid of the false or the fear self completely, what's the best way then to access it in a life of creativity or, just ordinary living, perhaps?
This is something I wrote about in my first book. And again, I think this has very good parallels with most schools of Buddhism. And once again, I don't want to, I have a tendency to sound academic, and I apologize for that. Just my nature. I'm a little bookish. But when I explored this thing of the wound, which is connected to invalidation. And it's the same thing as what Stephen Walensky, who was a student of Nisargadatta, is what he calls the core thought. In my own view, and I could easily be wrong. I'm wrong about a lot of things, but in my own view, the wound never goes away. And after reflecting upon that for years, and also working with this with some Navajo healers, I'm very grateful it doesn't go away. And here's why. When you really see your own wound, and this is where meditation can be very helpful. When you do sitting meditation and you observe your own wound, and you go back to your childhood memories, if you can, because they can be very instructive. And I can give examples if you'd like. If you go to your own wound and you see how you suffered, and the more you can see that, the more clear it is, and you feel your own pain and suffering, you realize that everyone in the world has, to a greater or lesser extent, experienced that same wound. And when you see that in every person you encounter in your life, when you can see it in their own anxiety, their stress, their desire to please, their own sense of vulnerability, your heart can go out to them, because you can go, what I experienced, they experienced. And it is through our wound that we really connect with other people. And we can really completely drop the sense of, well, I'm spiritually evolved and you're not. We can completely drop that absurd game and go, frankly, we're all in this together, and we're all connected, and we're all wounded. And through those wounds, we develop a passion for life, because this whole endeavor of mine came from a wound. And it is a fascinating endeavor. I wouldn't trade it for anything. You realize that what you have, the psyche, the very terrified little psyche, has projected as negative is in fact like that Buddhist concept of the diamond in your hand. The very thing you have been fleeing from is the beauty you so strongly seek. So it might take some time to get to that point, but everybody who chooses this path will get to that point. They will see that what they have been fleeing from is what they needed most. All the other stuff, is whether it fear self goes away or whether it doesn't, becomes a secondary consideration once you've clearly seen into your own wounding and realize that no one is spared, including modern day Navajos and people who were, 2 or 3 generations ago were hunting gathering cultures.
There's so many themes.
You know why, Jerry? Because the parallels, you see this, are everywhere. The more you see this, and this is the real strength of the first book I wrote, Liberation from the Lie, you can see these parallels through history, culture, and modern times. They're all inside each one of us. And so when you see it in your own direct experience, you can see it everywhere. And so it's just amazingly revelatory. And the treasure that people seek is what they've been fleeing from, with this drive for, I got to be happy, or I got to be positive, or whatever. I think the biggest burden that people carry is this idea that, and this is something that Eckhart Tolle talks about a lot, is I'm not enough, so I have to have more, or I got to be more, or by the way, something, Jerry, and this is important to point out, even though the way I sometimes present this can sound kind of complicated, it's really extremely simple, because it boils down to, as I am, I lack, point one. So I got to be more, or I got to have more, or life has to be different from what it is. So, why don't every listener of this program spend 1 hour of their day just doing what they do? Whether it's working at an office, coming home and making dinner, or going out to a movie. See how this more meme about life and myself and others, how that manifests in immediate lived experience. Notice it. Notice the demand for more or different. And realize that no matter what happens from your demands, that beingness continues unaffected. So, for example, I'm not dropping a name here, but John Sherman, he talks about reversing the direction of looking inside.
Mm.
I think it's a nice message. It personally doesn't click for me, but I prefer this beingness is not an object. It's not a thought. Everything else is a thought. So the when you see this quiet demand for more, because it's almost always present, it can be subtle or it can be quite obvious. Just watch it just do it for an hour and see if you can actually do that, because it takes a fair amount of discipline and concentration to do that. And once you get in the habit of doing it, you'll see it all over the place. And at the same time, realize this beingness that you are, no matter what is happening in your life, good or bad or neutral, that continues completely unaffected. That's a great exercise, because that answers all questions. You're pissed off in a traffic jam because you're late for a doctor's appointment. Beingness continues unaffected. It doesn't matter now, no matter how much you can scream at the other drivers or talk about your bad luck, you're always in traffic jams. Whatever it is, beingness doesn't especially care. It continues as the silent background of all lived experience. And the more you see that, directly see it without looking for it, okay, looking is just seeing it instead of looking for it, the more you realize that you don't have to get so bent out of shape over every little problem that comes up, and that no matter how tough life can become, this incredible, mysterious quality of beingness continues, unaffected, just as powerful and as present as ever. So I think that's a good exercise. And also, the other thing I would say is, if you have kids, validate them, not as you want them to be, but as they are. Because when parents take possession of their children, all kinds of terrible things happen. Children are not possessions of parents. They're integral beings in and of themselves. That's true of every being. Every expression of beingness in the universe is integral to itself, as well as being connected to everything else around it. So when you realize that everything is integral to itself, the most mundane elements of life become beautiful. A cup of tea can be an extraordinary experience. But that's sort of a different subject. I'm moving on to another topic there, which I don't think we need to do.
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, but in that mode, there really can't be a demand for more.
No, right. When you realize that every event is integral to itself, I mean, let me just give you a real quick example. Right now, we are, we bought an apartment, my wife and I, in Upper West Side of Manhattan, and we're still living in temporary housing in absolutely awful Midtown Manhattan. It's dirty, it's loud, it's insufferable. There's no nature. And I have to walk my dog about 2 hours a day in this noise, dirt. There's no nature for my dog to pee or poop on. So walks are endless, and it's really miserable. And when I am dominated by my judgmentalness, like it shouldn't be this way, I'm miserable. I hate New
Mm.
York, taking the walks. It pisses me off. But when I realize that the one thing I can control is that judgment, I can see that judgment as I'm no longer rooted in that beingness. And I realize that the only source of my misery is my own thinking. When I see that directly, even walking to Midtown with my dog, no matter how many honking horns, buses, sirens, ambulances, no matter what is going on, I can be in absolutely blissful heaven in those walks. And it just takes my breath away. And I see right there, boom, if I'm invested identification with my thinking and my conditioned judgments, I'm miserable. If, on the other hand, I see that as simply an artifact of my judgment, I'm liberated. And that's the liberation of the Buddha. Right then and there. You don't have to meditate 15 years to be enlightened. It's available to everyone in every moment, as long as they see the contrast between one's self-manifested misery and, in fact, recognizing that all experiences are integral to themselves, irrespective of anyone's personal condition, judgment of those same experiences. A bit of a mouthful there, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, what can I say? Yeah,
Yeah, isn't it true though, Jerry, that these are the hardest things to put in words?
yeah, you can't put it into words, which is why you could really, because you have that freedom, to put it into words. You can't say it once and for all.
You cannot say it because peacemaking and judgmentalness is in fact the universe of thoughts. And what are thoughts? They're words. And thoughts refer to other thoughts. So words refer to words. And this is the universe that the conditioned psychological mind can know. It's the only universe the mind knows. And so that's why this is such a difficult thing to express using words. And it's so difficult because as adults, we characterize everything in our experience, including ourselves, as a word. I'm the name Jerry Katz, and I'm a bright guy, and I have a good sense of humor, and I know you like hot dogs, and all those things. But you know something? That's still the realm of thoughts and words.
Yeah.
Beingness is not part of that. Is though all that is encapsulated within beingness. It's so that's why often I'm very pleased by the way I word things, and then I reflect afterwards and go, nah, not quite. So you keep on writing and you keep on trying to refine the clarity, but it's very difficult to do.
So when you write a book, I mean, some authors after they've written a book, a year later or so, it's, they get a little tired of it, or let me just ask you, how do you feel about your book, Liberation from the Lie?
Well, when I think about my writings, my first experience is profound humiliation. I go, I can't believe I wrote that crap. There it is, my wound voice talking directly to me. So I think that I go, what a piece of trivial garbage, because I'm very self-critical by nature. And then I've spoken to other writers, not just in this field, but I've spoken to historians and quite a few other writers. They all they all seem to say exactly the same thing. Even people who've won. There's an Irish. I heard him author. Oh God, he's an Irish author. He did win the Booker Prize, which is the England's big highest prize for fiction. And he goes, "Oh my God, I'm so dissatisfied with my writing." So and then what I do is I sometimes, now and then, rarely, I pick up my book and I read it and I go, "Did I actually write this? Because this is pretty good." And I this book is terrific, and I can't believe I wrote this. And someone said, "Well, you have such a big ego," and I go, "No, that's not it at all." It's that I would say to that person, I don't even recognize the person who wrote this. I'm really liking what's here on the page, and I'm reminded of a story that I heard about from, of all people, Igor Stravinsky. And his most famous work is The Rite of Spring, which is a ballet written in 1913. It's very, very percussive and violent, and it really ended romantic classical music once and for all, sort of, except for movie soundtracks. Anyway, he was asked, how did he write this work? And Stravinsky said, I didn't write it. The notes came to me from God knows where. And he said, I just put them down on the paper. And I love the way he put that, because that's exactly as I experience it. And I'm sure many other people who work hard, whether it's to write, paint, write music, do science. God knows where this stuff comes. Where does the thought come from? I mean, you could posit 100 theories. Well, I learned this from my parents, and well, where did it come to them from? And you could try to get it to its root, but we'll never know where this stuff comes from. So I actually, and I hope your listeners don't think I'm bullshitting, I take no ownership to it. Just like any other person who tries to be creative, it just came to me. I could say Navajo is Buddhist, but I wouldn't. It's not the whole concept. I don't know where it came from.
Well, let me just put that then in context to the fear self, because we were talking earlier about fear self can provide, some traction for a creative act, like like especially in comedy. A comedian could talk about, I hate this, or I hate this or that. They're really, and then they're funny, and it's entertaining and it's creative, and they're clearly using the fear self to, to step off of that. But when you have an experience where it feels like a creative work came totally from the outside or totally from someplace beyond you, then where's the fear self playing a role there, or is it playing a very subtle role?
Probably playing a subtle role, but I mean, anyone who's watched Louis C.K., who I love,
Yeah.
and thank goodness for the wound and the fear self, because it would be a humorless world without them. I mean, that is you know, that's really the end point. Is seeing the absurdity of this, the the sort of this this great American male, Marine bringing freedom to the poor Iraqis. I mean, the irony of that. Well, we got to blow up their villages and kill them, by a lot to bring them freedom. I mean, the whole notion of our grandiosity is so absurd that genius comedians like Woody Allen and Louis C.K. and Larry David and by the way, and I'm saying this now as just an aside, it really helps to be a member of a minority group, to be black, a woman, a Jew, because minority groups, because when you're not part of the dominant culture, you have felt some of the sting of being, sort of the downtrodden now and then. That's what enables you to see the absurdity of the dominant culture. And that's what humor is all about. And when you can really, really laugh at yourself, wound, fear self, spiritual self, and all, and just see the absurdity of all of human pretense, then you really are liberated. You're really liberated through laughter. And, you're past all the grandiosity of the grief, the victim, the whatever it is. And it becomes a grand, as Dante said, divine comedy. And that's what's often lacking. I see this all over the place in spiritual traditions, the lack of a genuine, ironic sense of humor. I see forced humor. I see forced smiles, but I rarely see self-effacing, ironic humor. And anytime you see too much seriousness or forced humor, you're looking at a oppressive, philosophic structure. And I know, by the way, that's not your case, Jerry, incidentally. So, but it is something I can't help but notice.
Yeah, yeah. I think fear. Fear, but I think humor has been is important in disseminating, this teaching of these non-dual teachings. At least in my experience, has been, that it's been important. But this interview has this interview been funny? I don't know. Are people laughing at all? I don't know.
What I find, and by the way, I'm embarrassed by this because here I'm going to be personal here, if I may indulge myself just for 1 minute. I know that on places like Facebook and in my writings, I come off as a very serious, somewhat edgy person. I am rather edgy. I don't deny that. But people who have known me can be a little intense by nature because, I probe so much in these fields. But I am, more than anything else, a rather silly person. And I cannot communicate this in my writing. I'm just not a good comic writer. And I'm not very good when I'm discussing these philosophical issues to get the humor. And I go, I ain't no Larry David. I ain't no Louis C.K. But in normal, everyday, with my everyday life with people, I mean, I was just with the family event over, Christmas. My wife, who's a hardcore militant atheist, nonetheless celebrates Christmas. I'm almost I never am like this. I never talk this way, or I'm never I don't know how to put this. I just don't live this kind of life that I write and talk about. I'm much more comic and absurd without making a thing of it, which gets very oppressive. People need to be funny. If you want to be unfunny, that's the most direct path to it. I wish I could be, but something? Once again, you can't have it all. I mean, I think I'm a fairly clear writer. I think I can talk about this stuff with some ease, but it's hard. I can't communicate the humor, which I just love. And
Well, I don't know if you have to. I mean, you're a Jew living in New York City. I mean, what else do you need?
Right, I got all the material you have.
That's everything right there.
But I think what it is, for example, some people are very self-conscious in front of a camera and they tense up a little bit. I think I too become self-conscious and tense up a little bit. So I think, and when you're tense, unless you're very, very comfortable with your audience, it's hard to be effortlessly, naturally, ironically funny. I'm always I'm even probably in this interview, although I am very, very comfortable with you, Jerry. I'm probably a little tense. And something also, again, I can keep on getting 7,000 theories for everything. I don't like being the center of attention. So
Mm.
sometimes when I'm in a gathering, um, I just sort of sit around and listen. And if some quip comes to me, which I think and usually I don't think about it. I just say it. Um, now and then they're funny. I
Wait. You're being funny right now.
if I could put a secret camera in our apartment, is I'm so rarely serious in my personal interactions with people that um, oh my God, I can't. It's the persona I evoke in the internet is way different from my actual one. However, I will say this. Um, I do like reading serious stuff, and I listen to a lot of classical music, and that can come off real serious. But and it's hard for me to be. I am by, you know, this by the way. Again, in a way, you have to almost be raised Eastern European Jewish. There is kind of a formality, a comic formality to Ashkenazic Judaism. You know, the like and anyone who spent time in New York's Lower East Side, you've made a very fine selection of this Knish, sir. This sense of false formality that Ashkenazic Judaism has. I have a lot of that in my own nature, and for better or for worse, it makes you a little uptight. You've got
Yeah.
kind of Ashkenazic formality to it. I'm not at all religious, and I barely identify myself as a Jew anymore. Even I
Mm.
don't celebrate any Jewish holidays. I don't go to temple. I don't even. It doesn't appeal to me at all. But nonetheless, it's the culture I inherited.
Yeah.
So hey, why fight it? Why fight anything? My daughter, she'll tell you, I'm the person I present. She often sees my stuff, and she goes, "Is that my father talking, or is that some alien who's taken over his body?" But oh,
Yeah, I really appreciate how you talk very honestly about some of your how you experience. You talk very honestly about your experience of stressful situations, like you just did here. You feel a little stressed doing an interview, and so I think the more you do, the more comfortable you are. But what I really liked in your book is when I quoted it in my review of your book was where you talked about you some relationships you couldn't get, maybe perhaps some relationships didn't develop because you felt you had to be intimate, and that kind of freaked you out or something.
yeah, something that still is that's who I am.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'm not a touchy-feely person. And I'm married to someone who is also not a touchy-feely person. So it that well. But I that is something that when I was a young person, I was rather popular with some girls that I liked. And so I was really, as a young guy, excited about that. And then they would like me more because I was kind of funny and interesting. And then they reached a point where I realized the relationship was taking a slight turn, ever so slight, toward being a little serious. So I was kind of like almost a boyfriend. And then and then I saw this pattern of I didn't really want to be intimate with them. I would begin shutting down. And I went, what the fuck is going on here? It's an uncontrollable shutting down of my emotional impulses. So this became my cross to bear as a young man, this fear of intimacy. And I would eventually just tell girls, I would say, hey, don't get interested in me because it's a dead end. Because although I'm funny and I'm fun to hang out with, and I do drugs and I smoke cigarettes and I drink and I like sports, um, but on when a relationship gets serious, I'm kind of a loser. And I would tell them that. I would right up front. I'd say, you're wasting your time with me. However, if you don't want to hang out or you want to do stuff like that, that's fine. But relationship, I'm not relationship material. So, and it was very sad for me to say that because I really wanted a relationship. I just knew I wasn't capable of it. So I convinced myself of this. I'm one of these people that I have fairly strong, I wear fairly strong glasses. So when I'm in the bathroom and I come out of a shower and I'm actually naked, I thank God for my bad eyesight because I can't see myself clearly in the mirror. And I still, to this very day, will very quickly put clothing on, but before I put my glasses on. Um, it's not that I'm a Puritan. It's that I can live happily without seeing the details. So, um, it's my own mission. As in Yiddish, it's my own mishigas. So I was just having a long conversation with my stepdaughter about the difference between Catholic original sin and Ashkenazic male ashamedness of one's physical body. And she didn't buy it, by the way. She thought I was completely unconvincing. And I think there's something to it. I think the traditional Ashkenazic, not Sephardic, Ashkenazic shame of the body is something distinctively cultural that I definitively got. I also, and here's, I don't want to give the details. I think I had a bizarre experience with my father as a young kid that traumatized me a little bit.
Yeah, I remember you talked about there were experiences of violence.
Yeah, and they were physical with my father, so I think it made a mark that it created anxiety to me to the very day. I never was able to talk to him about it. I actually have a theory that I believe my father was. If I hope my relatives are not hearing this at any time, I believe my father was probably gay, and he couldn't deal with it in his own family of origin, and so I became the 7 or 8 year old victim of his own violence and aggression, and I think it made a mark on me.
Hmm.
It made me nervous about the subject, and so we are the psychological persona. No matter whether you're the Buddha, or whether you're Muji or whether you're Eckhart Tolle, a lot of the elements of the personality don't change much.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your talking, rolling up the sleeve to show the tattoos. But I think Mishigas really could be another name for the fear self. I just want to read something from your book just to prove that you could really just replace fear self with Mishigas.
Good.
So it says right here on page 186, the Mishigas will always need and crave validation.
Right.
So
Yeah,
you can do that.
this morning I had a very hard time last night. I tend to have sleep issues. I don't sleep well, so I was up a lot last night. And I said to my wife before she went to work this morning, I said, I was up almost the whole night last night. And she went, oh, okay, I got to go to work. Bye. And I said, my mind said, hey, she should have said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. There was the old fear self wanting a stroke. And I chuckled actually to myself. I said, that is interesting, isn't it? I still go for that bullshit. And that demand for validation is what wrecks most marriages. There is both truth and falseness to this because there is, like, I have something in my new book called the rule of two. Anything you say positive is true, the opposite can be positive is true as well. So when you say she never validates me, it might be in fact accurate to say she doesn't like you anymore. That could be an accurate assessment. But when it's ego validation, it's you are the one creating your ego is the one probably creating distance, the demand for constant. I'm just a little boy and I want to be validated, please. Kind of situation. Watch as you demand validation. I have to say that, and on Facebook, I made two mildly sarcastic comments to very well-liked teachers of Advaita non-duality, and both instantly defriended me on Facebook.
Oh, wow.
And I said, "Isn't that interesting?" They're so they could have said, "Go fuck yourself." That would have been fine. But defriending was even taking it the next step further and saying, I'm not gonna. I'm superior to this person. I can't. I don't need. I don't have to. Put up with his stuff. And by the way, both were very, very mild, sarcastic remarks. Both defriended within minutes.
Wow. What do you think of Facebook in general? I mean, like, let me ask you this. After all this about the fear self, all this, what do you hate about Facebook? I know hate's a strong word, but I mean it in the, I don't mean it in the real hate way, just superficially. What do you hate about it? What do you like about it?
I could say something now that I'll lose all my Facebook friends. And I'm going to say it because something, I don't really care what people think about me. If you ever feel that you're not very smart, spend some time on Facebook. You'll start thinking you're a genius.
Yeah.
I read so much banal, repetitive, moronic things on Facebook that, like, I can't. And I go, is it just that I'm just an asshole elitist? Facebook is a reflection of the world. It's a perfect, because it is the world. It is our world. And so if the world has lots of ignorance in it, Facebook will have lots of ignorance in it. I can't tell you how much I desperately need more pictures of kittens playing with dogs, with lions, laying with a pony. You know, this stuff is so ridiculous. Of all this cheerleading stuff, you can be limitless. But this, blah blah blah. It makes me want to vomit when I read this. Um, I prefer seeing the lion eating the pony. To me, that would not because I like brutality, but it is lions are carnivores. They eat animals to survive. That's called reality. There's a great movie by Werner, what's his name? Werner Herzog, called Grizzly Man, about a guy who spent his summers in Alaska with grizzly bears because he thought they were his friends.
Yeah.
And one day, the grizzly bear eats him.
Oh.
And he actually recorded it on his. You can hear the sounds of him and a female friend who also was killed and eaten by the bear. They don't play it in the movie, fortunately. But in the middle of the movie, they interviewed a Native American who lives in the area, and they said, "What are your feelings about grizzly bears?" And the Native American said, "We try to stay as far away from them as possible." Because it is the nature of the bear to be a carnivore and very powerful. They protect their young with a lot of vigor. You get too close to them, they will eat you. That's called reality. Yes, if you want a puppy, get a puppy. They'll love you unconditionally. Get it. It's this need to see the universe different from what it is. Planets blow up millions of times all over the universe. Stuff happens. This need to induce this trance-like hypnosis. The world's always a loving and gentle place is madness, and you see a lot of that on Facebook. And so if I put my bitter, too caustic sense in, they go, well, "Eric's such a downer." I stopped doing that because people just saw me as an old Grinch, putting cold water and everything. But
People like you on Facebook. You have a good following.
yeah, I do, but I've calmed down. I'm no longer in the business of acting superior and elitist, like I'm the one who can call this to your attention, because that is again ego, pure and simple. People have their own life, their own trajectory, and if that's what makes them feel good, that's reality. It should be no different from what it is. And once again, it's my judgmentalness about the ponies and the lions, or the cats and dogs, that gets in the way of clarity. So, I learned that lesson in Facebook. By the way,
Yeah.
on Facebook, who I so admire, who I learned so much from. Uh, so every day, I'm just grateful for those voices in my life
Part of that broke up. I didn't pick up all that you said there.
on Facebook, who are so loving,
Mm.
compassionate, brilliant, creative, insightful. I can't wait to see what they have to say.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
some of the greatest people in my life are people who I know exclusively through Facebook. So, and it's just fabulous.
Well, the nice thing is, on the Facebook news page, you can just select whose updates you want to see. So
Yeah, you can navigate it. I'm not really that good at it. But I've done what you've done as well. And so I think Facebook is, yeah, you can waste time on it, but it can really be great. I have experienced some racism on Facebook, which I find depressing, but
mm.
there's racism in the world too. So
Yeah.
what be different?
Yeah, I've seen that too. Yeah.
So take bad, and also even categorizing as good and bad, you realize it'll be very variegated. And so if you're not mindful of that, then you're going to be a victim of it.
So what else you doing today?
Today I do have errands. We are moving soon to our permanent place, so we're getting
Yeah.
stuff ready, um, I do read a lot.
Mm.
I I'm be working on this peacemaking initiative in New York City, and um, I'm getting ready for that as well. Setting up plans and how that will work. And
Yeah, it'd be fascinating. Yeah.
so and also because I stay at home where my wife works at an office. I do all I do all the chores at home. I make
Mm.
dinner and laundry, and I do all that stuff. I'm
Yeah.
grateful for all of it. I mean, I live a very fortunate life.
Yeah. Like you have something about about playing roles and stuff. You've
If
written about that.
I believe that if you're not happy with what you're doing, stop doing it. Even if it's something you like have to do, like make dinner, just say, "Hey, let's go out tonight." If you're resisting what you're doing and you can't break that pattern of resistance, you just what you're doing, you're filling your own misery, is filling the space that you're in, and it's affecting others around you. So when I was parenting my daughter, and I'd ask her to clean her room, and if she did it with anger, I would say, much rather your room be messy, uh,
Mm.
because I didn't want to be in the same small space with her rage. So I much prefer good feelings between people than getting jobs done and reducing people to a function. That's another very Native American thing, that when you raise people to be a function, to be the good accountant, good doctor, the successful lawyer, you're invalidating them.
Mm.
So that's a whole other topic, of that we see people as functions rather than as living expressions of the creation. Um, we invalidate ourselves when we do that, and we validate them as well. So the function of my wife is to love me. Give me a break. That's
Mm.
that's your function, then I'm in the wrong relationship.
Yeah, we live really far removed from truth, so we do. It's good to have some kind of an exercise or reminders of that we are, and to return to the sense of being or beingness.
Yeah, because as soon as you hear that voice, I need to be a better Jerry Katz. Uh,
Mm.
you'll know that the parental superego has now entered the spotlight, and will use all that force to, in this moment, small and childlike. So we become the childlike version of ourselves, the needing, being very needy, being very very vulnerable to circumstance, losing our resilience, losing our sense of humor, and victim, and we become both our invalidator and our and our own victims simultaneously. So we replicate those patterns in our own life a lot, a whole lot. And you can see it in people, particularly in a place like New York City. You can see it in people's expressions as
Mm.
they're rushing to their next appointment. It's actually kind of amusing, and as well as sometimes a little oppressive. But by seeing it, you're directly living it. It's really
Yeah.
how the theory that I expound in Liberation from the Lie, plays itself out all the time. I mean, just it's just, I'm not patting myself on the back. It's just one of those. I'm speaking more as an academic. It's just a theory that really is a beautifully resilient theory. There was again. This is something I've related with other people. When I was again, I guess I was in my upper 20s. I was reading this book it's an obscure book. It was a letter from a Zen teacher from like 10th century China, and the person writing him a letter said, "How can I tell when I'm enlightened?" And the Zen teacher said, "You can tell when you're enlightened when you don't care about anything." Now, this sounds like a harsh response, but you can only be truthful when you realize that you'll survive anything you project as an indignity to your own psychological self. So it's not like you need to have a tell-all show, but it does mean that no matter what happens, that the truth, just like the famous line from Jesus, the truth sets you free, is that when you realize that the being that you really are, survives whatever embarrassing thing people dig up about you, you no longer care. It's caring, which really, it's conceptual caring that bends us out of shape, bends us out of shape. I should be more caring. I should. I read some article about starvation in Bangladesh. I should care more, but actually I don't give a crap. This idea that I need to care is, again, the same philosophy of positivism that I lacked. I'm never enough. You will that you will care when you need to care. You can trust that creation takes care of itself. That caring will happen when it happens, and you never
Mm.
have to worry about it. And that's true of everything. If you think, if I don't meditate today, then I'll be miserable, then go. Yeah, you've just reproduced your own misery. That happiness, joy, and their opposites happen when they need to happen on their own schedule. So you stop caring. You release that fist-like grasp you need to have on life because you don't really trust life. You really don't trust creation. All you really trust is your own ego to take care of yourself because you need so much taken care of. And that's what that Zen teacher meant by that. And to me, that's the best description of enlightenment I've ever encountered.
I'm hearing it pertaining to roles. So I found this quote from you. You write in Liberation from the Lie, show up and assume your role. Play it with strength, confidence, and passion. Life will create the role or roles, and you'll play the part or parts.
Wow, I really wrote that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but why? Why not? Why? It actually doesn't Osho say the same thing? Whatever you're doing, give 100% to it. If people do things half-assed, it means you're holding back, and that includes intimacy. Really, you know, take the step to where you take the step out of your habitual comfort zone, and see what happens. You'll be fine no matter what happens. That's the one thing you can trust. Beyond everything else, you can trust that. What you can't trust is your psychological projections of, oh God, this will happen. Oh God, oh God, oh God, blah, blah, blah. And now you're in the world of you're just a spinning object, a toy of your own projections. And you can't give yourself all. So a lot of people are scared of talking in front of groups. It's one of, supposedly one of people's most common fears. You know, who cares? Say what you need to say. Say it with conviction. And if you don't have conviction, then don't fake it. People know what's true to themselves. I think we do really know what is right and true for ourselves in the moment, not necessarily conceptually, but in the moment we do. And when we're not true to ourselves in the moment, we know that we've not been true to ourselves, that we've been dishonest. And when we're dishonest with ourselves, we're dishonest with others. And then there's a lingering regret, and then there's, oh God, I got to patch this up, and now you created a burden, and which didn't need to be created if you were true to yourself in the moment. Again, I think you see this in a lot of wisdom traditions. You don't need to be scared. You don't need to be scared of your own shadow, literally, psychological shadow.
And you're right in your book, in Liberation from the Lie, you actually write about public speaking in there, as I recall, going through it.
Yeah, because I've read just as reading sociological literature that's a very, very common fear, even greater than the fear of death. I've read. You can live with the same person for 50 years, and you'll actually never know how they perceive you. It's a mystery. Yeah. You'll never crack. So why not make your best shot?
Mm.
What is there to lose? You have nothing to lose. So go ahead. Try dancing. Make a fool of yourself. Who gives a crap?
Yeah. Well, you say play it with confidence.
Yeah. I mean, also if you don't be true to that. I don't feel confident now. I feel nervous. I'm true to my own anxiety. At least you're true to yourself. And in doing so, you're true to creation, because that stress is an expression of the creator in your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're always second guessing the immediacy of creation. So it's that second guessing which is where all the crap comes in. If you second guess, observe it and see what happens. Explore it. See, nobody can tell you how to deal with it except yourself. Nobody. Because, ultimately, it's always your own voice.
Mm.
You can't escape yourself.
Eric Gross, thank you very much. Website liberationfromthelie.com.
I really appreciate the opportunity. I enjoyed doing it. Thank you.
Bye, Eric.
Bye-bye.
Bye.